Let's get the latest now from the BBC security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
This is a massive gamble by Israel. Their argument is that they had no choice, that according to Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, that Iran was accelerating its work towards building a nuclear bomb, and that this was their best and only chance to try and prevent that and the region spiraling into a nuclear arms race. The counter-argument, which has run for some time and I think is still pertinent today, is that enough of the Iranian regime will survive this to now definitely accelerate towards getting a nuclear weapon. We don't yet know how much has been destroyed because Iran's nuclear facilities are buried deep underground. They've been very secretive. They have evaded some of the inspections, allegedly. And it would take enormous bunker-busting bombs, deep penetration ordnance to get right underground to destroy all of those. Ordnance that Israel, frankly, doesn't have. So although they've dealt a severe blow to Iran's regime and to its nuclear military program, which is militarized, there's no guarantee that this is going to be the silver bullet that Israel is hoping for. And there is a fear now that not only is Iran going to continue its retaliation, and who knows where that's going to end. Is it just going to be against Israel, or are they going to extend it to Gulf Arab countries? Jordan, for example, which is not a Gulf country, but it's been shooting down Iranian drones that are coming towards Israel. Where will this end? But most importantly, the hawks within Iran's establishment are now going to be saying, we told you so, we were right, they were going to attack us. The best deterrent to stop further attacks like this from Israel is go for the bomb. And what happens if Iran gets the bomb? Saudi Arabia will want one as well, and then Turkey, and then Egypt, and so on.
Frank, what is the role of the US here and the relationship between Israel, the US and Iran?
So Donald Trump sees himself as a friend of Israel, but he has been so far a relatively restraining hand when it comes to Iran. He's not managed to restrain them at all on Gaza. In fact, he seems to have given Netanyahu a free hand to do what he likes in that territory. But when it comes to Iran, he has been saying to Israel, look, hold off, because I've sent Steve Witkoff and his negotiators to Muscat and Rome to try and reach a deal. We all know that Trump loves a deal, and he's been trying to reach a grand bargain with Iran, whereby Iran will open up itself to more inspections and curb its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions being lifted. And those negotiations seem to have gone absolutely nowhere. So Israel has clearly lost patience with it and told US President Trump in advance, we're going to do this. And they kind of not exactly needed a green light, but they needed to make sure that they weren't going to be prevented by the US. The US says they didn't take part in it, but they didn't stop it. So there's a kind of slightly equivocal role here. The main priority for the US right now is trying to deter Iran and warn Iran not to attack US bases in the region. If you remember, they put out a warning some days ago for non-essential staff to leave, to be evacuated from US embassies in places like Baghdad and Kuwait.
Okay,
they will be very hard.
Frank, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We will be back with you in just a moment. I'm Lewis Vaughan-Jones. This is BBC News. This is our continuous coverage of those strikes overnight. Israel striking nuclear facilities in Iran, a response from Iran, drones being sent in the other direction. The latest report from Israeli media that those drones have been intercepted. With me is Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. Frank, we were just talking about the relationship between the US, Iran and Israel there. If I could just get you to throw forward a little now. What are the various options facing Israel, Iran in the hours and days ahead here?
Well, first of all, what everybody's going to be hoping for is that this calms down, that this doesn't kind of metastasize into a far bigger conflict that drags in the US. Donald Trump doesn't like wars. He likes to say, we end them. He's a business guy at heart. And that's why he was pushing for a deal. Now, we haven't heard yet whether the proposed sixth round of US-Iranian talks that were due to take place in Muscat on Sunday, whether those are cancelled. It seems hard to imagine they would go ahead. But what some will be hoping for in Washington and possibly in Israel is that this strike, this Operation Rising Lion, as Israel calls it, will have so weakened and chastised the Iranian regime that somehow it puts its hands up and says, okay, all right, we'll do a deal, we'll curb our nuclear program. I think the opposite is likely to happen. The hardliners, the hawks in Iran's security establishment, and it is they who run the country. I mean, the supreme leader is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, but around him he's got a kind of securitat of people linked to the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps, the guardians of Iran's original Islamic revolution from 1979. And the hawks in that establishment will be saying, this proves once and for all we need to now go for a nuclear bomb. That is the risk here. I think there will be some in the Israeli establishment who will be hoping that if they continue these strikes, that somehow the Iranian regime is going to implode. They would like nothing better than to see a change of regime, an end to what Israel sees as the existential threat to its existence. Because let's just imagine if Iran does get a nuclear weapon and it's able to weaponize, a nuclear device, and it's able to weaponize it, put it into a warhead, and able to mount it on a ballistic missile. Imagine if that was aimed at Tel Aviv. Israel's a tiny country with a heavy concentration of population in urban centers like Tel Aviv and Haifa. That does pose an existential threat to Israel, which is why they've decided to do this. But others are saying this is exaggerated, and Israel has been banging this drum for a long time, and the best way out of this is diplomacy. Annoyingly, frustratingly for everybody in the region, was that we had a deal. We had the 2015 nuclear deal, the Vienna deal, the so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. This was the crowning glory of President Obama's foreign policy, was a deal whereby Iran would submit to really quite intrusive inspections by the UN nuclear watchdog, that's the International Atomic Energy Agency, and in return, sanctions would be lifted. And then when Donald Trump took office the first time, in 2018, he pulled the US out of that deal. Iran didn't react for a year, but after a year, they said, you know what? If you're not going to play, then we're not going to. And they started exceeding the limits. In other words, breaking the terms of that deal. And they started heavily enriching uranium, well beyond the level that you need for civil nuclear power, which is 20%. They've been enriching it to 60%. And they've got a lot of highly enriched uranium, which it wouldn't take much to bring it up to the level at which you need to make a bomb. Now, it's one thing to make fissile material. It's another to weaponize it and put it into a warhead and mount it on a ballistic missile. But Iran does have a lot of ballistic missiles, some of which have been hit in this attack, but it's got plenty more. And that is the fear here, that this will push Iran into accelerating its drive towards acquiring a nuclear bomb.